So one of the things we're thinking about is how do we forgive and what are the benefits? So can you make yourself see a pink elephant in the room?
Nope. But I can't stop thinking about one now.
Can you make or stop yourself feeling resentful or angry or sad or happy?
I don't think I can do it just like that. I don't know about you. I think maybe with a bit of time it's possible. And with resentment, I mean, in a previous sermon we talked about whether resentment is actually good. But I'm not sure I'd want to feel it all the time.
There is this thing about what you focus on, though, isn't there? So if you focus on all the happy things or all the sad things or the positive or the negative things, it can affect your mood.
But I mean, I find there are things from my past which, if somebody else has something happen to them or something happens to me, which somehow has an echo of that, all of a sudden, all that resentment, which I thought had gone, sort of jumps back up again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm starting to feel that, you know, through this learning, through the forgiveness thing, that the biggest thing for me is that idea of a injustice gap, that when someone's done something to you and you just can't understand why, or what part you played in it, or what you could have done differently, or how the misunderstanding came about, and there's just this huge gap between, you know, how you expected to be treated and how you got treated. That's the thing I think that kind of perhaps brings back those emotions for me, that resentment from the past. But I think the other thing I'm starting to recognise is that for some people, the way in which they behaved at that time might be deeply subconscious, and they may not even have been aware of it themselves, and also they might have been kind of projecting something onto me that isn't me, so seeing me as a kind of a person that I'm not. And so there's those words from Stephen saying, "Forgive them, Lord, for they know not what they do." They seem to be resonating more for me with the idea of sometimes the way that people behave, they don't know what they're doing. You know, they really don't.
I mean, I think certainly if we can find a way to stop those feelings returning, then that would be a benefit, whether it's forgiveness or whether it's something else. But I think in terms of what we're talking about here, it is the process of forgiveness that would potentially cause that to happen. When we were researching this, we came across the concept of something called distasteful empathy. And broadly, it suggested that this was where we were called on to have empathy for the offender, for the perpetrator. And that if we can't find that empathy, then we won't be able to find forgiveness. It's not everything that we need, but a part of what we need is that empathy for the offender. And without it, the anger, the resentment, the grudge remain and continue harming us. Now, I'm very aware that asking us to look for empathy with those who have hurt us may be difficult, even for the middling offences, but certainly for the horrendous hurts. How can we find empathy there? And what it's worth saying straight away is that to empathise with a person in that situation is not to excuse them. We somehow need to hold both our hurt and have empathy for them. And the important part is not to let go of our hurt, not to effectively flip completely over and empathise so much with them that the hurt that's been done to us gets minimised. Also, to empathise with someone is not to deny justice. Whether it was illegal, there is some kind of penalty that needs to be paid. And preparing this, one of the things that struck me about this was the Epstein case, where his victims were strongly disappointed. They were really upset that he died in prison, and therefore they felt that justice hadn't been served because he hadn't been tried and found guilty. And justice is another...
It's also about validation, that though, isn't it? I think. To have your story told and someone say, yeah, I hear your story and it's true. I think, sometimes I think that's part of what we talk about in apology. Is the validation, because the flip side of that is being gaslit, isn't it? You tell your story and it's not true.
And the reason, or part of the reason for empathising, is to get in touch with our common humanity, so that we're no longer victim and perpetrator, but we are both flawed human beings. I think when I first came across this idea, I found it difficult, but I equally find the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission inspiring, and to a certain extent that's what's going on there. So, having reached the point where we may or may not have empathy, how do we forgive? How do we develop a forgiving heart? I think I want to suggest that it's a little bit like our internal landscape. Before whatever the offence was, we had a particular internal landscape, a way of thinking about things, thinking about ourselves, a way of being. And with the hurt, certainly at the more horrendous end of the hurt scale, that landscape gets irrevocably changed. In fact, it is a different landscape, and there is no way back to the old one. What we have to do is to discover a new landscape, and we have to find a path to it. And very often the problem is that the path to it can be more painful than the changed landscape. It will depend on particular circumstances. As I say, it's probably at the more horrendous end that the idea of going through more change, having perhaps reached a point of acceptance of the new landscape and seen that as how and who you are. And there are 4 things which Stephen Cherry suggests you need to move you from the new landscape into the future landscape. It's like crossing some dangerous river.
What's wrong with the new landscape then? Why do you need to go to the future one?
Well, because the future one is a better place to be. But the pain of getting there might keep you where you are, not because you think it's good, but because you fear the journey.
So the new landscape might be filled with bitterness or what have you?
Yeah. So the 4 things that are needed, suggests Stephen Cherry, are empathy, which we've already talked about, justice, which I think we've talked about a little, and which may not be achieved, a looking to the future rather than the past. So perhaps having a more how could this be, rather than that's what happened to me and that's ruined my life approach. And restorative justice can cover both a forward-looking outlook and the justice side of things, but very often it's not easy. And finally, faith in goodness. And Desmond Tutu has a reasonably well-known prayer that says, "Goodness is stronger than evil, love is stronger than hate, light is stronger than darkness, life is stronger than death. Victory is ours through him who loves us." And it is that faith in those choices of belief in Desmond Tutu's prayer. And so the choice that we face is whether we remain in that new landscape or we work toward forgiveness for the offender, which can be hard work, but which can lead to a better place in future. And that is the challenge for each of us, whether we can face that journey. Amen.